Charles Darwin was absolutely brilliant at writing popular books. And his book was on sale at train stations. So you can imagine people catching a train. What am I going to read on the train? I'll pick up On the Origin of Species.
네, 반갑습니다. 안녕하세요. 안될과학 항성입니다. 오늘은 정말 특별한 두 분을 모셨습니다. 지금 제가 이렇게 들고 있는 이 책, 진화라는 책을 쓰신 작가 세라 다윈과 에바 마리아 샤도우스키라는 두 분을 모시고 직접 저자와의 대화를 진행을 해볼 건데요. 진화에 관한 설명이 매우 많이 담겨 있어요. 그래서 보시면은 그림이라든지 이런 내용들도 사실 아이들이 보기에도 너무나 좋은 책이지만 어른들이 보기에도 누구나 보기에도 정말 좋은 책을 여러분들께 소개를 해드리고 세라 다윈 여기서 이름을 보시면은 아시겠지만 네, 여러분이 알고 있는 그 찰스 다윈의 고손녀입니다. 고조 할아버지가 찰스 다윈이신 거죠. 이분도 직접 진화를 연구를 하고 계시고 여기 보면은 내추럴 히스토리 뮤지엄이라고 되어 있어요. 베를린 자연사 박물관과 협력을 해서 만들어진 책입니다. 박물관과 같이 만들었기 때문에 이 책에 대한 내용과 박물관에 대한 이야기 그리고 진화에 관한 이야기를 한번 들어볼 예정입니다. Hi, nice to meet you all.
Nice to
Wonderful.
meet you. Thank you for having us.
I'm very honored to interview with you all. And can you introduce yourself?
My name is Sarah Darwin, and I'm a research scientist at the Museum für Naturkunde, Berlin, Germany.
Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Eva Maria Sadowski and I'm a paleobotanist and I also work at the Museum für Naturkunde in Berlin, Germany.
You've said that when you were younger, you didn't really realize how significant your great-great-grandfather Charles Darwin's work was. Was the moment when it finally clicked for you?
What's interesting about characters like Charles Darwin, these historic sort of characters, is that interest in them comes in waves. And I was born in the 1960s, and we just had the celebration of 100 years since the publication of On the Origin of Species, which was in 1959. So there was a sort of an interest in the 50s, and then that dropped in the 60s. And really, Darwin wasn't somebody who we talked about very much as a family, nor did I really learn very much about him at school. So as you say, I was actually quite shamefully grown up, really. When the penny dropped, I begun to realize the significance of Darwin and his legacy. And that is something that I'm still appreciating. I'm still working through his books. I'm still learning about him. And I feel he's a fantastic symbol for today.
Everybody knows who is the Charles Darwin.
So it was a great pleasure to meet her and to work with her.
And Sarah, you started out studying art. That's what I heard. But later become a botanist. Was there a shift inspired by your Darwin family heritage, or were you always drawn to plants?
I was always drawn to plants as a child. I used to grow endless avocado plants in my bedroom. So that was something that I always had a passion about. And when I studied art, I went on to study botanical painting. So using drawing and painting to describe plants for field guides and for scientific papers. And then it was a natural progression into botany from there.
But you still draw some of the arts.
Yeah, I still like doing art, actually. And a lot of the projects that I do nowadays involve art, like writing a book, which is, with lots of illustrations, or just in general, I think the artists have a very clever way of communicating to their public. And actually, I think scientists can learn a lot about the way that they manage to channel their information to the public and to citizens.
So let's talk about this book from now on. What was the biggest reason or goal for writing to this book? Who did you have in mind as your readers, and what messages were you hoping to get across to the readers?
I'd been thinking about writing a book about evolution for children for quite some time. When talking to adults, I found that while many adults believe in the theory of evolution by natural selection, then they don't really fully understand it, and certainly not well enough to communicate it to children. And then, of course, What on Earth Books, this wonderful publishing house, approached me just before, literally, I think it was my last cup of coffee in a cafe before COVID-19 hit, and invited me to write this book. It was a complete joy to work with What on Earth Books. Their editor, Katie Lennon, was brilliant. Nell, the designer, did a fantastic job. And of course, it was wonderful working with Ava.
Of course, I enjoyed working with you too, Sarah, so thank you. And with the book, we wanted to target children between 8 and 12 that are quite a young age, so that they are able to understand evolution and how actually life on Earth came to be and how life evolved during geological times. And also it was important for me to convey the fascination for nature and for natural sciences, and that maybe it motivates children to become a scientist at one day, or to at least spark an interest in science.
Yes, and if I can add to that, natural selection is incredibly relevant today because biodiversity is the result of evolution by natural selection. And so if we want to understand biodiversity in a scientific way, then we really need to understand evolution. So I'm really keen that actually everybody should understand this simple yet incredibly beautiful theory of evolution by natural selection, so that they can understand biodiversity, so that we can all get involved in these debates about what we can do about the extinction crisis, these situations that we find our generations find ourselves in today.
As I read this book is not only for children. This is the introduction of your book. You wanted to take readers on a journey through Earth's history, right? So what kind of experience or feeling do you hope readers will have as they travel through the book?
Our main goal really was that we should convey this incredible awe and wonder for the natural world around us, and that the reader should be excited to learn more, either whether that's reading more books or going to science museums or natural history museums, or actually going out into nature and picking up a rock and seeing what's underneath it.
And we basically try to help the reader also to travel with us by having, for instance, a timeline below at the bottom of the page, so that you know where you're at in time. And then we had Olga, of course, who did her beautiful illustrations that would involve the reader into this journey, and that would spark even more interest or fascination for the entire story.
How did being Charles Darwin's great-great-granddaughter shape the way you work on this book?
As you know, Darwin contributed to many areas of science. Obviously, he's best known for evolution by natural selection. I suppose one of the things that we wanted to do in the book was to try and get rid of some of the myths that surround Darwin and try and make it as accurate and as scientific as we possibly could without dumbing it down.
So this book was collaboration between the Museum for Natuurkunde in Berlin and the Natural History Museum in London. So how did working with this institution help make this book richer and more complete?
We are both very lucky to work in such an institution, because we are also surrounded by many brilliant scientists from many different fields. And this was actually a great chance for us, and also an opportunity to get inspiration, and also through the exhibitions. So for instance, I also occasionally walked through the exhibition and looked at the specimen, which might be very interesting for the readers, or looking for specific stories that we could include in the book. And also, you have to keep in mind that Sarah and I are both botanists or paleobotanists, but we would also write about research that is out of our expertise. And so it's always good that you can get in touch with so many different scientists in both museums to ask for advice, for instance, to discuss certain subjects, or just to ask for proofreading the text.
And because Eva and I are both scientists, this was really our top priority, that it should be as accurate and as up to date. And of course, science is constantly changing, as you know,
Right.
so that we can only do it from the date that we wrote it. But it was just wonderful having that support. And in the book, I think it's on page 10 where we look at variation. Yes, you see in the bottom left corner of the book, you'll see this little group of people looking at snails. And we had a rather lovely, we have this woman called Nora at the Natural History Museum in Berlin, and she's a snail expert. And she went out with her daughter actually to look at snails in a Berlin park one weekend. That was sort of inspired and inspiring for us as part of the book. So that's just one small example.
And the one other thing that I really impressed in this book is that this book doesn't just cover Darwin, but shines a spotlight a lot of the other scientists as well. Why was that important to you to introduce a lot of scientists? And is there any lesser known scientists you'd like to introduce or readers to remember?
We're very aware of, as scientists, as I'm sure you know, we always stand on the shoulders of giants. So we're always looking to see what other research has been done and comparing results with what we find. I mean, this is just the way a scientist will work. We wanted to bring across that Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace were not kind of suddenly coming up with this theory of natural selection out of the blue. You know, they were building on what other scientists had said. And we were really glad that our editor, Katie, was so keen on including so many scientists.
Right.
So in actual fact, in the book, I think we've got over 40 working scientists or people who are working in. And in addition, if you look to page 60 to 62, we also have lots of references of books and papers that people, or websites, and also a list of all the people who actually helped us with the book. So we've actually included hundreds of scientists really in the book, which is very important to us.
And this, you and Eva.
Yes.
Yeah, everything is written in Korean. So hopefully you can get this Korean version of the book later.
Yes,
sometime later.
I would really love that. It looks absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, we have to ask our publisher to send us a copy.
You used the analogy of the survival game to explain natural selection. So why did you choose this approach?
Yeah, well, this was something we felt quite bold and brave doing that, actually.
Right.
So what we did on pages 10 and 11, we introduced this simplified concept of natural selection: 1, variation; 2, inheritance; and 3, the struggle of existence, with a short explanation of DNA, but very, very short, as you can see, and also making it really clear that natural selection takes place in a population rather than in an individual or as a species. And very often you will see that, you know, X species evolved, but it doesn't work like that. It works within a population group, as it were, rather than within a species. So that was something we really wanted to get across. We felt that in order to simplify it enough for children to understand,
Right.
we would use this game of life, you know, this hypothetical example, to kind of try and bring the concepts together. We wanted to make it clear that this was not a sort of a scientific story, that this was a game and that it was a hypothetical example.
I like to explain natural selection, but I totally agree that that was a very good analogy to explain what, to get the concept, to grab a like a just big concept of the natural selection.
We want to engage children to continue reading. We want them to be fascinated and to continue and loving the book. So we had to look for different ways on how to spark their enthusiasm. And actually, we worked a very long time on this double spread. And I think at the end, Nell Wood, our designer, came up with the idea, why don't we put the text into this game? And so we were very delighted by this creativity and also by this fantastic idea. And
You have a great example of the co-evolution between insects and flowers. Do you have another favorite example you can share with the readers, not from this book, but other good examples that you can introduce?
Co-evolution is a great one, and we use, so broadly speaking, co-evolution is where two or more species affect each other's evolution, and this can be predator-prey. For example, in the book we use the monarch butterfly and the milkweed plant, or it can be more of a sort of symbiotic thing where you have flowers and insect, bird or mammal pollinators, or it can be more of a host parasite relationship. We could have chosen lots of examples. Because we're botanists, we're kind of quite drawn to choosing planty type, and I think this book has got many more plants in it than most books on evolution for children.
yeah, just maybe to add that co-evolution or co-evolved relationships lead in general to more interactions in an ecosystem, and also they can make an ecosystem more complex. And high complexity also means you have more niche where organisms can adapt to, and at the end this would lead to more species or diversification.
From the birth of the planet to the rise of the mammals and birds, this book covers some huge moments in Earth's story. Is there one moment you really hope readers walk away with you?
There are many moments in the history of life that we found important or significant. If I had to choose, maybe I would choose the evolution of angiosperms during the Cretaceous, but maybe I'm biased because I'm a paleobotanist, because that was the time when the angiosperms evolved quite suddenly, and also they diversified in a very short time period. And also Charles Darwin called it a mystery when he realized that that happened in Earth's history. And this very rapid diversification also had an influence on the evolution of other groups like insects, for example, including pollinators, but also ferns diversified with the angiosperms. And so it was really like an explosion of new life in that time period. And I would like readers to remember that, because the Cretaceous, of course, is famous for its dinosaurs.
Right.
And for good reason. But I would also, raise interest for other groups of plants and animals, because for me, sometimes I feel like if people talking about evolution or the evolution of life in general, they mostly think of dinosaurs, but it's so much more than dinosaurs. And this is just one example where I would like to express that other groups were also very significant in the evolution of life.
This book shines a lot of many organisms, from Devonian fish to just what we talk about, the Cretaceous dinosaurs and olive flowers at the same time, right? Did you have a specific reason for choosing these examples?
So we had to choose specimens or organisms that were, on the one hand, crucial for the evolution or for certain evolutionary events, but that on the other hand, they would also be interesting for the reader. You always have to choose because there's such a diversity of life and we cannot put everything into one book. So we had to find like key taxa that were significant for the evolution of life. And for instance, we have chosen Archaeopteryx, that is on one of the double spreads. And that is actually a good example, because on the one hand, it's from an evolutionary perspective very significant to understand the evolution from dinosaurs and extant birds. But on the other hand, it's also a very famous specimen in the museum collection or exhibition. So we also had to keep in mind to show both important specimens, but also organisms that would be crucial to understand the evolution of life.
The other thing is you can show the people in the museum as well, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think we also wanted to show species that children would, that's a T-Rex. It was important to have some of those iconic species in there. We wanted to include fungi and plants as well.
You also talk about the humanity and society and the future of the evolution in this book as well. Humans have shaped the planet, and ourselves like in countless ways, right? So how do you see human activities like artificial selection and rapid environmental changes fitting into the bigger picture of evolution?
Artificial selection or domestication is one of the ways how human influenced the evolution of life. Maybe artificial selection sounds a bit negative, but actually for us humans it was a very positive, because they were able to domesticate plants and animals so that they would have specific features that would serve us well. So for instance, that a plant has tasty fruits, or that an animal is larger, or that actually was one of the key moments in the evolution of humans, because it evolved, it allowed them to flourish and to thrive, and actually to be able to survive. This again had also influence on the cultural evolution of humankind.
That's why you mentioned about the evolution of the viruses or the climate changes, and those are things as well.
Yeah, and I think we should make it clear that domestication isn't something way back in human history. Plant scientists and plant breeders are constantly working on adapting crop plants, for example, that can cope with climate change, can cope with less rainfall, and many different things. This is a work in progress. I think is incredibly important when we're looking at sort of crop plants and domestication is that we should keep the wild crop plants growing in the wild and not rely on seed banks, because if we get diseases that come through, for example, we had the potato blight that wiped out a third of Irish people many years ago. You know, you need the wild crop relatives of these plants.
You also mentioned about this is the future. Today we're changing the planet so quickly that it could drive new forms of the evolution. What kind of the changes do you imagine for life in the far future?
I think humans are having a massive effect on the environment. One of the big things that we think about with conservation of wild animals and plants is that we tend to choose the sexy species to save: the polar bear, the black rhino, the Bengali tiger, because they're charismatic, they're iconic, you know. And what is the effect? You know, why are we not saving slime molds and slugs, which may indeed have important roles to play in nature? So I'm very much of the opinion that we should be saving habitats, and if we save habitats, then the plants and animals will be saved. And of course, another aspect is that some species cope better with urban environments. For example, birds, because they can fly, and bats and insects seem to cope well. So we're having massive changes. Every little decision that humans make about conservation, planning, and farming has a knock-on effect to the environment.
So, what did you focus on making the long, complex story? Because evolution is basically same as the time scale of the history of the Earth. To make a complex story of the evolution easy for readers of all ages, even for kids and teenagers, what did you focus on to writing this book?
It has two aspects. On the one hand, the text, and on the other hand, the illustration. And so both things have to complement each other and have to be very accurate, but you have to balance it with being also easy to understand and, let's say, attractive to the reader. And that was the biggest challenge, I would say, for us. So we had a great team that supported us in this process. So Sarah already mentioned Katie Lennon and Nell Wood, our editor and our designer, but also there was our illustrator, Olga, who helped us with this process.
Publishing is a really teamwork activity. That's what makes it such an exciting thing to do. And so working with different people who have different strengths was very, very inspiring.
You both are a researcher, right? And botanist and popular science writer. Why do you think it's important to make scientific knowledge and discoveries accessible to the public?
Yes, I mean, where we work at the Natural History Museum in Berlin, we are actively encouraged to spend time doing public engagement, whether that's doing lectures, writing books, going on TV or radio, or writing popular articles, or doing school visits. And at the end of every year, we're asked to write down exactly how many different public lectures we've done and all the rest of it. So it's taken very seriously. So scientists need to make what they research available in a language that people can understand. And in Germany, this is taken incredibly seriously. You know, people come to museum for evening lectures to meet scientists, to hear what their research is. And this is something that actually works really well because the members of the public often come up with brilliant questions. And you think, wow, I hadn't thought of that. It's a two-way street, and it's very important that we keep these communications open.
So it would be sad if we just kept everything we gain in knowledge to ourselves or to a very small community, because what's the sense of our research if nobody knows what knowledge gain we come up with at the end? So there needs to be a transfer from our research to the outside, to the public, about our findings.
If I can add to that, Charles Darwin was absolutely brilliant at writing popular books. You know, On the Origin of Species, published in 1859, he wrote it as a book for the public, not for the scientific community alone. And his book was on sale at train stations. So you can imagine people catching a train. What am I going to read on the train? I'll pick up On the Origin of Species. And I think we've got a lot to learn from the way he wrote, very scientifically accurate, but in very simple language that really anybody can pick up and read.
All right, thank you. To wrap up, do you have any message or piece of advice for your Korean readers to read this book and any young science enthusiasts watching this interview?
We very much hope that your readers will enjoy our book, and we hope that this will inspire them, if not to become a scientist, but to be interested and to learn about nature and to have some of the passion for nature that Charles Darwin had.
Yeah, and specifically also have fun when you read the book.
Right.
Enjoy it.
Yeah.
With your parents, with your friends. That's also one of my hopes for this book.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for having me with this great interview. I'm very honored to having both of you as a writer of this evolution books. We are very lucky to have this great book to have a chance to read. Hopefully, after a lot of people after see this interview, people get by this book and they read, try to get the message for both of you. What try to write down. Hopefully.
Yeah,
Thank you so much. Lovely to meet you.
네, 이렇게 오늘 이 진화라는 책의 저자인 세라 다윈과 에바 마리아를 모시고 인터뷰를 진행을 해봤습니다. 지금 이 책이 저도 읽어봐도 너무나 예쁜 그림과 함께 이 어려운 개념들을 너무나 잘 풀어낸 책들이었기 때문에 이분들이 어떤 고심을 하고 어떻게 이 책을 풀어냈는지에 대해서 알 수 있는 좋은 기회가 되었던 것 같습니다. 그럼 저는 또 다음번에 좋은 명사들을 모시고 인터뷰를 진행을 하도록 하겠습니다. 지금까지 안될과학 항성이었습니다. 감사합니다. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.